This is our second year having our annual research symposium is in its 13th year, but this is our only second year to offer this online and have a virtual poster session. Nonetheless, some of the components between doing a face-to-face poster session and a virtual poster session, it requires some different skill sets, and then there's some similar qualities that you'll want. So I have assembled really an expert panel together. I'm very excited. Those of you who have not crossed paths with me, I am Meg Portillo. I am the Associate Dean for Research and Strategic Initiatives in the college. And my home unit is Interior Design, where I served several terms as department chair. I'm also so pleased to have Dr. Michael Kung with us, who is the director of global education in the college. And he has, he's very involved with the International Center across campus, but also does campus-wide service. He's for 3 or 4 years actually been on the jury that has evaluated the 3-minute thesis competitions hosted here at UF. So he'll give some really terrific insights. And then we have Dr. Hal Knowles, faculty member from Sustainability in the Built Environment. We have served on committees together, which I have thoroughly enjoyed in the past. Hal, it's interesting because he can share his own personal experience when the 3-minute thesis competition was brought to UF in 2014. That second year, he entered in 2015, and we'll share that experience, and then also entered in 2016. Both Michael and Hal are just excellent public speakers, and I'm very glad to have this time together to share some of our insights, thoughts that we think would be helpful to you in preparing for this competition, you know, as well as when you move into doing interviews and presentations in your seminars, as well as if you go into the academy or industry upon graduation. So, Michael, can you share an experience you have on maybe having to do a quick 3-minute presentation relating to your research? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, sure, of course. And so the idea of the 3-minute thesis, I think it's relatively new, maybe past decade or two that it's really started to take foot. I think especially with TED Talks, and then there have been lots of professional presentations where students are limited by number of slides and also time limit. So maybe like 5 slides in 5 minutes, 7 slides, 7 minutes, things such as that. So the 3-minute thesis I found is a very good way for you to practice telling others about what your research is on. So more than likely you've heard from your professors the whole idea of an elevator speech. And then the situation goes like this. So if you're maybe at a conference, you get into the elevator and standing next to you is the most prominent professor in your field of research. And then you talk, and then you have maybe 30 seconds or so to tell him about your research, because it's been your dream to really meet with him and you want to form your connection with him. So the idea is you are able to concentrate your research, hook in the reader or hook in the audience member, and then get across what your research is doing very quickly, succinctly, and leave them wanting to know more about you and to learn more about your research. So with elevator speech, right, maybe 30 seconds or so is appropriate, but sometimes 30 seconds may not be enough. So this is where the 3-minute thesis comes in. I've talked to students, I've performed in 3-minute thesis type presentations as well. And it's a very effective way to train you, because your research, you're going to be an expert in your field. And then there's so much you want to share, especially if you are talking with an audience member who may not be familiar with your area of expertise. So then you'll have to decide what background information to include, or how much detail to use, what sort of jargon and academic words to use, things like that. So with the 3-minute presentations, it gives you a 3-minute thesis, it gives you a lot of time to really prepare and think about what it is you want and create a very effective presentation. And I know, especially if you are an international student, so this is something that I hear a lot about, is speaking pretty much right in front of a live audience and sometimes be a bit trickier, or just being called last minute to talk in class can be trickier. But with the 3-minute thesis format, especially our DCP's research format, you have time to think about what you want and plan ahead and even record, re-record, and create a presentation that you are proud to share, that you feel will let the different audience members, faculty, staff, students, all know what you're trying to do. And I believe after I think the second part of our presentation will be giving you hints and tips. So I hope you'll be able to stay for that part as well.
So before we turn to Hal, it's interesting because as Dr. Kung was talking to us, I realized if you come to day 2 of the research symposium on November 10th, we have asked our incoming faculty members to participate in what's called a lightning round, where they have 5 minutes to introduce us to their dissertation. And that actually is always a very popular session. We've done it for maybe the past 4 years. And last year when we were doing that virtually, the chat box was just lighting up with exchanging references and comments and invitations to coffee. So again, as you bridge into academia or industry, you may be asked at one of those first faculty meetings or at an orientation meeting at a firm or a company to tell us what your dissertation is, tell us what your thesis is, tell us what your research is, and you'll have their attention probably for all of 3 minutes. So again, now Hal has an interesting story to share about this topic. Dr. Knowles.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Portillo. Yeah, so as Dr. Kung was saying, the 3-minute thesis is an opportunity to distill down, a much larger, effort and idea and execution of your research into a format that you can really communicate quickly and conveniently to a colleague or maybe a lay person. And so there's a lot of different skills that you may not be using every day in your research that kind of get activated for the 3-minute thesis. And I found the process of doing that 2 years in a row. The first year when I did it in 2015, I did not make it beyond my initial heat because it's kind of almost like a academic competition where each round you kind of progress forward. And then the second year I did fortunately make it into the finals for the top 10 here on campus. And I found that in that first year I went in with this idea that I'm a pretty confident speaker in general ways. I worked in cooperative extension here at UF, and so I was doing a lot of outreach, with builders, developers, and local governments around the state, and was doing a lot of trainings and in-service outreach, and it felt pretty good. But I'm not used to that 3-minute constraint, and so I think I'm better talking off the cuff than I am actually in a really organized and time constrained way. And so it kind of came back to haunt me. I like to write, and I thought I wrote a really nice, clean, 3-minute speech. But I think I got caught up in my own words in the process and realized that, though I wanted to say it exactly like I wrote it, once I got hung up on like a phrase partway through, I kind of froze and time was clicking. And of course I was feeling more and more embarrassed. It's almost like that bad dream when you go and you're presenting naked, right? We all have that horror dream where we're like standing in front of a crowd naked. And it was that kind of moment. And then I realized that in the process of searching for that phrase that I had written in an exact way, and I kind of like to write poetically in a very literary way, I just lost it. And then it destroyed me for the rest of the second half of that presentation. And in the second year that I did it, I realized nobody but me knows what I was supposed to say. And so it still activates some of that nimble, adaptive, speaking off the cuff skill sets that we may have if we've been in front of audiences before, but then it also fuses that opportunity to really dial it in and have a true sort of scripted speech. And so you kind of have to activate both of those and be prepared to redirect if you forget exactly what you're going to say, and then kind of circle back and latch back in. And I felt like I had moments where I was forgetting exactly what I wanted to say the second year, but I was more prepared to know that I could quickly adapt and fill that space and get that thought out. And then once I got back to where I knew I was in my script, I could quickly kind of get back on script, and I was able to finish it on time and do that well. And the take home of that whole process is I did mine before I had finished my doctoral research, and it was still kind of early in the process, and it really helped me to hone in and focus my research, because I felt like once I took out all the fluff and I distilled it down to these grand ideas, it really made me feel confident in the big picture questions that I was asking, why, how I was going about them, and what I might take away from them. So I really feel like I learned a lot, and it made my doctoral research that much better by simply participating in the process.
And it's interesting how the exercise of doing a 3-minute thesis does force you to make decisions on, what information is absolutely critical, making no assumptions as to your audience's background knowledge of the topic. And it's interesting how going through this process can really propel you forward. It's not just an academic exercise to show that you can do this. I mean, it really can have impact. And my story, which I will give you the short version of, is when you hear about this elevator speech, and Michael referenced that when he was introducing the 3-minute thesis, it seems like such a hypothetical, and some people might be like, well, I take the stairs, I don't go on elevators. So what as good as this? I literally was in a conference, and I was with a graduate student, and I was presenting, she was presenting, and we were going up a few floors. We were in a high rise, and Joe Hazel, who was chairing the search committee for the chair position that brought me here to Florida, literally said, what is your research? You always are doing something interesting. And so I told her about the work I was doing on the DreamWorks campus. And Marlo, my grad student, when we got off the elevator, she's like, I think there was more to that question than her interest in your research. So later on, they had a reception, and once again, Joe popped up and is like, hey, we're looking for a department chair who has a strong research base. Come on down to Gainesville. Would really like to meet you and talk to you. So again, that elevator speech really was put me on a very interesting took me to a crossroads, and it's led to an amazing experience that I've had here in Florida. So again, those few minutes that can change your life. And if I would have stumbled and stuttered in the elevator, I don't know, maybe she would have come up to me, maybe I would have been a dark horse candidate in the search. I don't know. But, but again, if I wasn't passionate about the work, if I couldn't clearly communicate what I was doing, I don't know, it could have made a difference. I might not have been invited. So at any rate, the next thing that I was really interested in, and I think we would like to share with you, are what do you really see as essential components to a really effective 3-minute thesis, a 3-minute research presentation? Dr. Kung.
All right, so I have a quick presentation prepared, so let's see if we can get it started. And great. Are you able to see the main screen or just the small screen?
The small screen.
Okay, let's just switch to sharing then.
Yeah, just switch them.
Yeah. Great. So the
Yeah, that's
3-minute
good.
thesis, what we have. And when it comes to the 3-minute thesis, there are just some things you can keep in mind. And especially in terms of our DCP presentation, you have a lot you can control a lot because this is going to be a recording. So the differences between presenting live versus presenting on a recording are going to be slightly different. But for today, we're just going to stick with what it means when you are recording. So some things you want to consider when you're recording is your location. So if you get a chance, I believe Professor Knowles had shared some of the previous presentations, so take a look at the chat box, but you'll see location is very important. When you're recording, you want to make sure it's a professional background. You don't want anything distracting in the background. And because it's you who are doing the recording, you can control where you want to be. So that's something just to keep in mind. You don't want anything distracting, anything that will kind of change where the audience's focus is going to be. You want the audience to focus on you. And then next, regarding the recording, you also want to consider what sort of technology you're going to be using. So again, nowadays, smartphones produce very high quality videos. You can also use webcams that you can make a professional presentation professional recording, if that's what you really want to do, but be familiar with the technology. So for instance, take a few shorts, kind of listen to what you do, look at the lighting, also consider the audio as well. So you might have a brilliant presentation prepared, but then if the audio doesn't pick up, then it's going to sound muffled. There might be snaps, hisses, buzzes, things like that. All of that will, again, cause the audience member to get distracted. And that's not what you want, especially when you only have 3 minutes. So if possible, I recommend trying to get a direct microphone. Like for instance, what I'm wearing now, doesn't look the best, but when I've talked to my students, they said they prefer me using this type of microphone because it comes out more clear. Nowadays, a lot of the headphones, maybe with the AirPods, things like that, they do have a good amount of echoing cancellation and background noise cancellation, but just kind of give it a try, like I said, and see how it looks. So record yourself, or you can have someone else record and take a look and see if you feel happy with what you have. And then finally, your appearance. So once again, because it's being recorded, you have plenty of chances to make sure you look presentable. So make sure you look nice, clean, maybe business casual, things like that. It's unlikely that you will really need any props or any sort of costumes, decorations, things like that. I mean, you can since it's Halloween is coming up, but actually, let's scratch that. The recording is going to be for next year, so don't worry about that. But anyways, costumes are a bit risky, so I would not recommend that unless you really know exactly what it is that you're doing. And you've probably also heard the idea that the initial appearance is very important. I think some studies say it's maybe 70, 80% of what a person thinks about you is based off of the first appearances. So just keeping that in mind, you want to make sure that you look very professional and that you don't do anything or wear anything that's going to attract or detract from the audience's attention. So again, hairstyle, nothing too elaborate, jewelry, nothing that's going to really be shiny and cause the audience to stare at the jewelry rather than you and your presentation. So the next step is the actual performance. So when you're talking in front of the camera, one, you can try to have a script, or with 3 minutes, if you practice enough, you may not even need a script. And in terms of the script, one thing that you're going to want to think about is the vocabulary. So as Drs. Portillo and Dr. Knowles have said, you need to consider what sort of academic vocabulary you're going to be using, who your audience member is going to be. So in general, unless you know specifically who the audience is going to be, you want to try to keep it a bit more general and to make sure you stay away from very specific words, acronyms that only your field are going to be familiar with. things such as that. And next, in terms of performance, I also want to cover the idea of interest. So you want to make sure that you're going to be interesting. So for some of you, it may be a bit different. It may be your first time recording, something like that. When that happens, you just want to keep practicing and then make sure that you are comfortable in front of the camera. Some people, they tend to sort of clam up in front of a camera and they become robots and they start reciting, which is not really the best way to give a presentation, especially when you only have 3 minutes. And finally, when it comes to your performance, you also want to consider a hook. So this is very common, any sort of research paper that you might be hearing, any sort of presentation. You're going, like journalism, things like that, you're going to hear the idea of a hook. And this is how you start off, how you're going to hook your audience member in. So whether this is going to be a really fascinating statistic or some sort of doomsday prediction, something that's really going to attract the audience member, you want to think carefully about how you want to bring your audience member in and keep them basically hooked into your presentation for the next 3 minutes. And then next, the idea is your poster itself. So again, this may vary a little bit based off of what sort of presentation you're doing in the future. So for instance, if you're doing a presentation, like a 3-minute presentation, you may be given one slide, some information. In the case of DCP, it's my understanding that you will be presenting your video along with your poster. So your poster, you'll see what the requirements are. I think it's a 24 by 36 poster. And then you want to have certain DPI, things like that. But just some notes about the poster itself. You're going to have to find a good compromise between how much text you have. Because again, if you want, you could basically paste maybe half of a research paper onto your poster. You can fit a lot of text, especially if you use a lot, but then it becomes a little less attractive to the reader. So if the reader really wants to read your paper, they would just go ahead and read your paper once it gets published. So in general, when you're presenting, the less text you have, the better. You want to make it more effective. You want to make it easy for anyone viewing it to follow along. So make sure everything is logical, it flows. If you're in terms of your presentation, usually you might want to go left to right, top to bottom. So too many arrows can confuse the reader, too many graphics will confuse the reader, too much text will bore the reader, things like that. So because this is a poster, you're going to want to find a good compromise between too much text and not enough text. And then finally, in terms of reading, this is just something to remember. The audience member, they can read on their own. So when you're presenting, don't just read off your poster, because you're not making the best use of your time. 3 minutes will go by very quickly, and you want to make sure you take advantage of that time. And then some final tips I just want to leave you with is, one, be confident. So this is your presentation and this is your area of expertise, especially in our case, since you could record, just re-record. You can keep practicing as many times as you need until you're satisfied. When it comes to presenting, the best orators, you may not know it, but they spend a lot of time practicing on their own. So sometimes you might think it comes very naturally. In rare cases, it probably can, but for the most part, everyone will spend time practicing. So especially if you have some trouble with pronunciation, or if it's the first time you're presenting your research, or the first time even reading over your poster, you want to make sure that you practice, practice, and practice. So especially nowadays, it's very easy to just record a session and you can delete it if you don't like it. You can record it and choose what you like. And then finally, just keep it, clarity is very important. So clarity in terms of everything. So in terms of your appearance, in terms of your speech, and also in terms of your poster. You want to make it nice and neat and easy to follow. So these are the tips I have for you. I hope you find them useful. Dr. Portillo, I think you're on mute.
That was great, Michael. And I felt as though you really walked the talk. You had primary colors, very simple graphics, very straightforward messages. And yet it is a balance, because you need to show that you're connecting your research, to precedent, and you'll need to give that background, really talk about why your work is timely and significant. What are those driving research questions? What are the findings or expected findings? Have you run pilots, studies? Are there any preliminary findings to report? Are there results that have emerged from your work? And everyone is at different stages of completion. There will be some submissions that are completed work, others are more substantial completion. But going through the process can be enormously helpful. There's a lot of decisions to be made. So Dr. Knowles, how do you make those decisions? What do you think is the North Star in keeping you focused as you put together this video?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Dr. Portillo. And thanks, Dr. Kung, for laying out such a really, I think, coherent and cohesive and concise summary of the key takeaways. I actually wish that I had had a chance to hear that before I went, because I think it would have dialed mine in even more. I think one of the key approaches that really helped me was simultaneously trying to think about it from the top down and the bottom up. And so the bottom up is kind of maybe that really tiny summary. If you could say your research in a sentence, right? I mean, that's even faster than that 30-second, elevator pitch. And then it's kind of the full research project itself. And you kind of slowly but surely work your way down to that spot where the particular form of media dictates. So in the case of a poster, it may actually be, if you were to read a full poster, it may take you more than 3 minutes to read the poster, right? So maybe the poster for like a poster competition, because I also did the graduate poster competition here at UF, and the poster was kind of derivative of my 3-minute thesis, but it was actually different because people stand there and physically look at the poster, and then you're standing next to it and they're kind of interacting and asking questions, and it's a little bit more back and forth and dynamic, where the 3-minute thesis is very straightforward, just kind of information push. So if it's okay with Dr. Portillo and Dr. Kung, I actually would like to quickly show my 3-minute thesis from 2016, and then I can pull up my poster and I can sort of show how they kind of relate to each other, and then where you can kind of feed off of that and how they ultimately helped me to better understand my own research and how to sort of tell the story. Would that be okay, Dr.
No,
Portillo?
I'd love that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks
So
for sharing this with us.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully Dr. Kung won't judge it too harshly from his judge and moderator chair. All right, so let me see here. Share this one. Okay, oops.
Home is where the heart is. Finding pattern and meaning in short interval residential electric smart meter data. Hal is a PhD student in interdisciplinary ecology in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and his faculty advisor is Dr. Mark Hostetler. Please begin when you're ready.
For the benefit of both people and planet, I've dedicated the last 20 years of my life to researching the more efficient urban use of energy, water, and landscape resources. Our past thinking assumed buildings were simple machines with prescriptive performance predicated on asset specifications, such as the type of lighting, water heating, and air conditioning installed. We spotlighted the greenest buildings from the background baseline with formulaic rating systems. Unfortunately, these asset-based models of building performance were often wrong. We forgot that all buildings have both programmers and users. Thus, our present thinking integrates occupant behavior into the equation. Human plus machine turns house into home. Like programming a thermostat, today's operational models box our human nature into a clockwork concept of the original machine, as if robots were the operators. Yet people are chaotic and unpredictable. So how do we model our dwellings if we are the ghosts in the machine? Our future thinking will use nonlinear dynamical models to treat buildings as extensions of their living inhabitants. If home is where the heart is, then I believe the heart of home health hides between its beats. 12 monthly billing intervals have poor performance information. Conversely, advanced electric smart meters annually measure thousands of consumption intervals per building. These pattern pulses serve as a coded cadence of changing conditions, both climatic and communal. To paraphrase Albert Einstein, we cannot solve today's problems with yesterday's thinking. I'm here to suggest that new thinking and tomorrow's solutions await us in other dimensions, fractal dimensions. The coastline of Florida and the surface of a tree are fractal shaped. Paradoxically, there's no single measure that can define their length. As our ruler gets ever shorter, their outlines appear ever longer, revealing increasingly more subtle details. These objects and the systems that generate them are too complex for the zero-dimensional points, one-dimensional lines, two-dimensional planes, and three-dimensional solids of Euclidean geometry. At our healthiest, our lungs respire, our brains fire, our postures sway, and our hearts beat with fractal complexities that are neither too simple and regular nor too disordered and irregular. We are adapted for uncertainty, and the fractal forms and functions of our bodies enfold our fitness. As such, my graduate research applies the science of chaos and complexity to decode and diagnose the dynamics of building performance and occupant health from electric smart meter data as if this signal is the heartbeat of the home. These methods may benefit our communities in many ways, including more targeted home and lifestyle improvements and more synchronous supply and load balancing of the emerging renewable smart grid. Thank you.
All right, and let me pull over the poster here, and I apologize that took me a moment to figure out. They changed the format of the media site there, and I couldn't remember how to show the split view there. So I'm gonna put this into full screen mode. Okay, so then shortly after I did that 3-minute thesis, I had a chance when I had a little bit more data, and again, I was more sharing the idea and sort of the approach and my anticipated outcomes because it was early still in my research before I had a lot of the actual data. But as Dr. Kung had suggested, I tried to focus more on, the slide that I had the ability to share as being kind of a storyboard. So there was less text and I was the storyteller, and it was really almost like a comic strip where it was trying to, be visual support for what I was telling. And at one point, I think I sort of caught the video crew off guard because I walked across to actually, as I was telling the story from sort of top left to bottom right, I kind of walked across the stage to the other side where I was telling the story about the fractals. And they actually had to sort of shift over because everybody else was standing there. I also tried to integrate, some body motion and animation in my own sort of presence on stage, talking about the brain firing and the posture swaying and the heart beating, and trying to kind of, bring a little bit more dynamism to the way that I was presenting. But you can see here how that very easily then converted into an academic poster for the poster competition that was also here on campus, a year or so later. And again, telling sort of the same story, left to, top left to bottom right, kind of giving the context here, kind of connecting the story, then starting to look quite a bit more academic at this point with the objectives, methods, results, and potential uses. And then again here, in the poster, some of the words that I kind of highlighted in color and bolding and italics were really some of the key take-home summaries that I was trying to deliver, so that if someone didn't want to read the whole poster, stand there and read it all at once, their eyes would naturally kind of see the graphics, see some take-home messages in the bolded words, and then if they felt so compelled to do it, they might dig a little bit deeper and read that whole paragraph or somewhere thereabouts. And I took that same kind of idea where I took the shorter 3-minute thesis and kind of expanded it out into this poster, but took the same take-home points that I was trying to reflect in it. So I think that was kind of some of the key takeaways that I wanted to reflect for our audience and help them to see, you know, the ways that they might tell their own story of their research.
It was really great to see that. And it is interesting how all of the modes of, you have these different modes of communication. So when you were talking and presenting, you seemed very comfortable with the topic and enthused about the topic, and your body language. Interestingly, I wanted to make a comment. I had just read a short brief from Harvard Business Review on projecting confidence in professional presentations. And there had been a series of studies looking at politicians, public presenters, on what their body language was even communicating. And Bill Clinton, you know, very enthused, a lot of gesticulation, but he was criticized by his constituents and potential, you know, voters that he was trying to win over, that when you're flailing your arms around too much or making very broad gestures, you're viewed as not as trustworthy. Now, Hal, I was noticing, they actually started calling this the Clinton box. They said, think of your torso as a box and don't really have your, you know, hands extend beyond that box. But I noticed even during our presentations this morning, Dr. Knowles was, you know, when he was emphasizing points, you saw that reflected in his body language and showing that you have control. And just one other example is holding the ball. And when there's a point you want to emphasize, and it's more showing confidence and control, is punctuating maybe your primary thesis with this, almost think of yourself as holding a ball. And there was one speaker, very persuasive, iconic figure who presented like this, and it's Steve Jobs. Really used that to underscore his presentations. So again, when you're creating your poster, you have certain constraints and opportunities. And when you're doing your 3-minute presentation, you can use your all tools at your disposal: the tone of your voice, your hand gestures, your pacing, your cadence. So Dr. Knowles did that very masterfully, I think, in his video, in his presentation.
Thanks,
What
Dr.
other?
Portillo.
Sure. What other comments? Do you have any other comments before we open it up to questions?
No, I think I'd rather maybe just open it up
Sure.
and see if there's questions in response, unless Dr. Kung has any additional insights.
Yeah, well, actually, after viewing your presentation, I started thinking about something. So if you go back to the link that Dr. Knowles had provided, you'll be able to see the winners for UF's 3-minute thesis competitions. And one thing to note, last year's winner, Samantha Burrell, she had presented in the year before, and you'll be able to see the topic is still relatively similar, but you can see a remarkable difference between how she presented and her enthusiasm and things like that. So if you get a chance, it's kind of fun to see how she's changed and how she improved to go from someone who didn't place to someone who won first place last year.
That's great. And it also seems as though in the preparation for this, on one hand, you think it's a 3-minute, but you do have to put time and thought and do a little bit of rehearsal, and maybe even quite a bit of rehearsal to do justice to this presentation.